I think about my own mom, a single mom, just barely struggling to get by, working multiple jobs. These programs are a lifeline. They make it possible for people like me to ultimately have a pathway to success. And you all are sitting here running legislation on shower heads while millions of Americans' health insurance is expiring, while millions of Americans can't even put food on the table right now. And you're over here parading around state officials, demonizing immigrants, talking about cutting basic programs, and you're passing legislation to redefine shower heads in Congress while the President of the United States is illegally invading foreign countries.
Order.
Breaking news. One lawmaker just accused the highest office in the country of fraud, political retaliation, and targeting entire communities on the record. Billions in frozen aid. Elections on the line. Viral videos. Federal power. And a charge of weaponized government. But here's what most headlines aren't telling you. Because what Melanie Stansbury revealed next changes everything.
New Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Happy New Year. Welcome to our guests. Thank you to our legislators for being here today and to our guests.
Thank you.
You know, I come to these committee hearings, I'm ready to debate the topics. I'm grateful that you're bringing this case to our attention. Yes, we need to prosecute these crimes, period. Let's do that. And I'm also grateful to see that this committee is actually conducting a hearing that is in its jurisdiction, which is oversight over government fraud. But I do have to say, to my colleague's point that was just made, that I am surprised to see the focus, given that the President of the United States and the administration are engaged in fraudulent behavior literally daily, including just a few days ago, invading a foreign country, using the United States military to take their oil, and notifying oil and gas companies before the United States Congress, and the president claiming last night that he is personally going to control the oil and give government kickbacks to oil and gas companies. So why are we not investigating that? It definitely gives you the impression that there's a double standard in this country. I also want to say that I'm troubled to see that this hearing is being held in conjunction with an announcement that the administration made just yesterday that they were going to freeze $10 billion in federal funding for childcare and family assistance to 5 states across the country. And if you watched the president's crazy address yesterday, you heard him say it himself. But I want to say one thing, because my colleagues have pointed out all about weaponizing the government for political purposes. Well, these 5 states happen to have one thing in common. They all have Democratic governors and gubernatorial elections this year. Is this a coincidence? I don't think so, my friends. And this, of course, comes after weeks of viral videos from a young man YouTuber who was literally creeping around daycares by himself, making claims about fraud that were not there. And then the vice president and the FBI director were retweeting these videos without even verifying if they were true, unleashing a furor of anti-immigrant and anti-Somali hate across the country, wherein thousands of Somali people got targeted and harassed, including by the President of the United States, who literally used his platform as the President of the United States to call an entire community garbage. He literally said that. So we're not accusing people of being xenophobic and racist. They are being xenophobic and racist, including the President of the United States. And I want to say, for one, that I stand with the Somali and the immigrant community standing here today. But there's a bigger policy point here, which is that this is being used as a politically expedient moment to take away the immigration status of Somalis in the United States as part of the mass deportation plan of this administration. And it is also being used by the 2025ers in this administration to freeze critical programs that we know low-income families depend on, and which they call part of the woke agenda. This is part of a larger effort to defund these programs, as we are seeing across these 5 states. So I think it's important to pull back the curtain a little bit about what is actually going on in this hearing and its coordination with the administration, that this is about, 1, demonizing political opponents in Democratic states during a major election cycle. 2, it's about demonizing the immigrant community to support cruel and illegal mass deportation policies. And 3, it's about demonizing poor people and struggling families to justify taking away the basic programs that are helping them survive in this country. So I want to just close out by saying that I grew up in a low-income family. Many of you have heard my story before. But as I woke up to the news that the president was freezing child care funding to these 5 states, I had to think about the millions of families that would be impacted by it. I think about my own mom, a single mom, just barely struggling to get by, working multiple jobs. These programs are a lifeline. They make it possible for people like me to ultimately have a pathway to success. And you all are sitting here running legislation on shower heads while millions of Americans' health insurance is expiring, while millions of Americans can't even put food on the table right now. And you're over here parading around state officials, demonizing immigrants, talking about cutting basic programs, and you're passing legislation to redefine shower heads in Congress while the President of the United States is illegally invading foreign countries.
Order.
What unfolded in that committee room wasn't just a policy disagreement. It was an accusation of selective justice delivered in plain sight, under oath, and timed to a moment when billions of dollars and millions of families were already on edge. A member of Congress didn't challenge the existence of fraud investigations. She challenged who gets investigated, who gets protected, and who pays the price when federal power is deployed. And the reason this matters right now is simple. The hearing didn't happen in isolation. It happened alongside frozen funding, viral narratives, and an election year backdrop that raises uncomfortable questions about motive. The hearing was officially about oversight, government fraud, misuse of funds, accountability. On its face, that's routine. But the moment shifted when Representative Melanie Stansbury redirected the focus. She acknowledged the need to prosecute fraud, clearly, unequivocally. Then she asked the question that reframed everything. If fraud is the concern, why is the spotlight aimed here and not there? She accused the administration of ignoring alleged misconduct at the highest levels while aggressively pursuing cases tied to Democratic-led states. Then came the timing. Just one day earlier, the administration announced a freeze on $10 billion in federal child care and family assistance funding, impacting 5 states. 5 states, all with Democratic governors, all facing gubernatorial elections. Coincidence or coordination? That question sat at the center of her remarks. And then she connected the dots further. Viral videos, unverified claims, and the amplification of those claims by senior officials before any formal validation had occurred. Here's where the narrative becomes more complex and more troubling. The official framing centers on fraud prevention. But Stansbury argued that the mechanism of enforcement tells a different story. According to her, unverified social media content helped fuel public outrage. That outrage then justified heightened scrutiny. That scrutiny coincided with funding freezes. And those freezes disproportionately hit communities already under political and economic pressure. She pointed to the consequences of rhetoric, specifically towards Somali and immigrant communities, arguing that language from the highest offices didn't merely criticize policy, but stigmatize people. This is the part that rarely makes headlines. The allegation isn't just about funding. It's about narrative construction. Who gets portrayed as suspect? Who gets labeled as a threat? And who becomes politically expendable when fear becomes a tool? If government power is truly neutral, she argued, its application shouldn't mirror electoral maps so closely. So the question becomes, is this oversight or is it strategy? Regardless of where one stands politically, the consequences are tangible. Frozen childcare funding doesn't hit abstract systems, it hits households. It determines whether parents can work, whether providers can stay open, whether low-income families can remain afloat. At the same time, rhetoric aimed at immigrant communities doesn't stay contained within hearings or press releases. It spills into schools, into neighborhoods, into online harassment and real-world fear. Stansbury's point was that policy choices and public language reinforce each other. When enforcement targets align with political cycles, trust erodes. When oversight feels selective, legitimacy weakens. And when basic assistance becomes collateral damage, the fallout isn't partisan, it's human. What comes next isn't dramatic, it's procedural. Expect more hearings, more subpoenas, more public statements framed as accountability. But behind the scenes, the real battle will be over perception. Are these actions viewed as lawful oversight or political leverage? Are funding decisions defended as fiscal responsibility or challenged as coercion? And will investigations expand evenly or remain narrowly focused? Those answers will shape not just this debate, but how future oversight is received. Because once trust and neutrality is lost, it's hard to restore. At its core, this moment isn't just about one hearing or one lawmaker's speech. It's about a fundamental question in democratic governance. Can accountability exist without becoming a weapon? And when power, politics, and public narrative collide, who decides where the line is drawn? That's the conversation now unfolding. And it's one that won't end when the gavel falls. What do you think? Oversight or something more?